Time to start our broadcast with the front page. This is a news digest of what happened since yesterday's broadcast and while we were asleep. The Israeli-Hamas war still leads the news. Evacuation process for refugees from Gaza is underway. CNN reports injured Palestinians have begun to arrive in Egypt through the Rafah border crossing one by one. This is according to the Egyptian Health Ministry. These people are the first to be allowed out of Gaza since the recent Israeli-Hamas war began in early October. Up to 500 foreigners could also cross from Gaza into Egypt under a Qatar-mediated deal, multiple sources are telling CNN. Americans are not expected to be among the first groups of foreigners potentially allowed to leave Gaza, this according to an official, again reporting to CNN. The Israeli Defense Force is defending their strike on the Jabalia refugee camp. A spokesperson for the Israel Defense Forces yesterday defended the strike a day earlier on the Gaza Jabalia refugee camp, saying the Hamas commander it was targeting made the strike a clear military necessity and a legitimate target. Quote, "We know he's an arch-terrorist," said IDF Lieutenant Colonel Peter Lerner, speaking with CNN's Phil Mattingly, referring to Ibrahim Biari, who the IDF said was killed in the strike and described as one of Hamas leaders responsible for the October 7th attack on Israel. Quote, "And of course, given the chance, he would do it again and again and again," said the IDF official, referring to terror attacks. A spokesperson for Hamas has denied that Biari was there, called the Israeli strike a heinous crime against safe civilians, children, and women. Israel has been condemned by foreign powers, has lost diplomatic relations with some of them. USA Today reports that Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and the United Arab Emirates each issued statements condemning Israel's airstrikes on the Jabalia refugee camp. The three Arab states noted the dangerous and escalating conditions in Gaza. The UAE, which first diplomatically recognized Israel in 2020, warned that, quote, "indiscriminate attacks will result in the irreparable ramifications in the region to begin." And three South American countries have severed ties with Israel in response to the country's ground offensive in Gaza. Chile, Colombia recalled their ambassadors yesterday, citing humanitarian concerns for Gaza civilians. Yemen's Houthi rebels have declared war on Israel, this being reported by Reuters. Yemen's Houthis have waded into the Israel-Hamas war, raging more than 1,000 miles from their seat of power in Sana'a, this declaring war on Tuesday that they had fired drones and missiles at Israel in attacks that highlighted the regional risks of the conflict. Part of an axis of resistance backed by Iran, the Houthis have rallied behind the Palestinians since Hamas attacked Israel on October 7th, opening a new front for a movement that has waged war for 8 years with a Saudi-led coalition in the Gulf. Houthi military spokesperson Yahya Saree said in a televised statement the group had launched a large number of ballistic missiles and drones toward Israel, that there would be much more attacks to come to, quote, "help the Palestinians to victory," unquote. His statements confirm the widening scope of the conflict that has unnerved states, including the world's biggest oil exporter, Saudi Arabia, hardening fears of spillover as Israel seeks to destroy Hamas in its Gaza Strip stronghold. Elsewhere in international news, Jewish homes in Paris have been painted with stars of David. This from Metro News. Homes across Paris have been marked with the Star of David in a chilling reminder of the Holocaust. France has already documented 819 latent anti-Semitic attacks since the war began between Hamas and Israel on October 7th. This according to the Minister of Interior, Gérald Darmanin. In Jewish homes in the outskirts of Paris, multiple blue stars of David have been painted on homes and stone fences. Swastikas have also been sprayed next to Jewish institutions. Students have been publicly harassed outside of Jewish schools. Another Parisian said, quote, "This is not a tag. This is an insult to history, an insult to democracy, an insult to the Republic." Yesterday, the mayor of Ville Saint-Ouen-de-Seine condemned the same odious attacks. Paris must wake up quickly, he said. A retiring UN human rights official has called for the end of Israel. This from Fox News. A high-ranking UN official has retired after calling for a one-state solution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. In his letter, the official wrote on what he called an essential point regarding the war between Israel and Hamas. In what was described as his, quote, last official communication, unquote, as the director of the New York office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, Craig Mokaber, sent an October 28th letter to Volker Turk of Austria, the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, detailing what he believes a UN norm-based position on the war would look like, in what critics are calling comments devoid of historic fact. Mokaber called for a one-state solution, which would mean the end of Israel. Quote, we must support the establishment of a single democratic, secular state in all of historic Palestine with equal rights for Christians, Muslims, and Jews, and therefore the dismantling of the deeply racist settler colonist project and an end to apartheid across the land, said Mokaber. Professor Ann Bayevsky, the director of the Turo Institute on Human Rights and the Holocaust, told Fox News Mokaber wrote this letter as one of the UN's highest-ranking human rights officials on UN letterhead with a UN email address. Quote, as such, his overt call for the destruction of the Jewish state lays bare what is really going on at the UN in the war now being waged by and at the UN against Israel. National news. FBI Director Christopher Wray is warning of jihadi violence in the United States, this being reported by NPR. FBI Director Christopher Wray said yesterday the war between Israel and Hamas has led to a spike in threats against the United States, warning that we are in a dangerous period as various terrorist groups look to leverage the conflict for their own causes. The threat of international terrorism in the U.S. has largely subsided in recent years, particularly since the defeat of the Islamic State in Iraq and Syria. But senior American officials say Hamas's deadly attack October 7th on Israel has created a new dynamic with dangerous implications at home and abroad. Quote, the reality is that terrorism has been elevated throughout 2023, but the ongoing war in the Middle East has raised the threat of an attack against Americans in the United States to a whole nother level. The Hamas attack, which killed 1,400 people in Israel, will serve as an inspiration on the likes of which we have not seen since ISIS launched its so-called caliphate years ago, Director Wray said. He also said that the FBI has no evidence of an imminent threat from a foreign terrorist group, but he did note that since Hamas's attack on Israel, Al-Qaeda has issued the most specific threats or calls for violence against the U.S. in years, while Islamic State has urged followers to target Jewish communities in the United States and Europe. Also in America, Cornell student has been arrested for bigoted Jewish threats. This from USA Today. A 21-year-old Cornell University student was arrested yesterday for posting threats online against Jewish students at the university over the weekend, according to the Department of Justice. Patrick Dye, a junior at Cornell University who is originally from Pittsford, New York, was arrested on a federal criminal complaint charging him with posting threats to kill or injure another using interstate communications, according to the Justice Department. If convicted, Dye faces up to 5 years in prison, a fine up to $250,000, and a term of supervised release of up to 3 years. Dye is expected to make his first appearance in federal court in Syracuse, New York today, according to the Justice Department. For its part, other Jewish students are decrying college campus bigotry at campuses across the U.S. Anti-Israeli protesters have organized massive demonstrations since the Hamas attack on Israel October 7th. The surge in incidents have been paired with anti-Semitic rhetoric and violence against Jews, leaving many students feeling unsafe and fearful of attending class. Campuses including UC Berkeley of California have become increasingly hostile environments and home to some of the most aggressive anti-Israeli demonstrations. Most recently, student groups supporting Palestinians have held a national walkout that's happening today in support of Gaza and to protest U.S. funding of Israel, according to posts by pro-Palestinian student groups on social media. Students like Allison Lax have experienced similar problems at NYU. Quote, there have been multiple anti-Israeli rallies at NYU where I've heard students chanting death to Jews, chanting death to anybody that supports a Zionist state. I mean, these are horrific things to say at a so-called peaceful protest. I've heard students chant, globalize the Intifada, just horrific things in classrooms. Professors are spewing absolute misinformation. Lax, who has been a vocal advocate for Jewish students calling out the protest, shared she has even been personally subjected to threats at NYU. People know who I am. I get death threats daily on Instagram. It's very scary. In class, I sit next to my peers who cheer Hamas and support the murder of over 1,400 Israelis. I don't think I'm ever going to feel safe on campus again. In Washington, Fox News reports Republican leaders released the text of emergency aid legislation, which includes $14 billion for Israel in its war against the terror group Hamas. That money would be offset by siphoning funds from President Biden's Inflation Reduction Act, specifically dollars allocated toward the IRS. House Speaker Mike Johnson, the Republican from Louisiana, is hitting back at the Democrat-controlled Senate for criticizing the House GOP standalone bill to aid Israel. Quote, "It is in our national interest to support our great ally and friend Israel in their time of need, but we also have to keep our focus on our own financial stability, and so those things must happen simultaneously." The bill separates Israeli aid from Biden's original request for $106 billion in supplemental aid, which also includes money for Ukraine and the southern border. Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, the Democrat from New York, criticized the Johnson bill on the Senate floor yesterday. Schumer called the package, quote, woefully inadequate, and denounced its offset provisions as poison pills that increase the deficit and keep wealthy or help wealthy tax cheats from paying their fair share of taxes. For his part, Speaker Johnson then said, quote, "I would refer Senator Schumer and anyone else who's a critic of this to the Treasury report that came out this week that indicates we're going to have to borrow $1.6 trillion for the next 6 months to keep the government in operation." Johnson responded in an interview today. Medical updates today. A sad one from the Baltimore Sun. Lawrence Fawcett, the 58-year-old man who in September became the second person in history to receive a genetically modified pig heart to continue his life at the University of Maryland Medical Center, died after showing signs of organ rejection. Mr. Fawcett's last wish was for us to make the most of what we have learned from our experience so others may be guaranteed a chance for a new heart when a human organ is unavailable. Also, by the way, Mary Lou Retton is recovering. She says thanks for all of the support, but she is indeed on the comeback trail from pneumonia that nearly took her life. And that is today's Front Page.